GingerGM.
Hi everyone, and welcome to another analysis video. And I'm going to be mainly looking at my round 3 game from the 150th anniversary of the Dundee competition. And it's a very interesting game, this one. I think it was one of my better games, so it's a nice one to show. And I won't tell you the result yet. My opponent played very well as well, so anything could still be possible in the game. And if you want to go straight to the game and avoid a little bit of chit chat, then you can see the time code just below in the description of this video, and that will tell you what you need to jump to just to see the chess. But you know what? I'm not just going to talk about chess, am I? Because I've had rather an eventful week or so. It's always eventful in the life of the GingerGM, I have to say, for better or worse. This time worse. And well, I mean, you may have not heard that I was due to visit America, and something I was very much looking forward to doing, my first time over in America, and I was due to be doing a talk over there in Davenport in Iowa, and it was arranged by Bob Long, who runs Thinkers Press over in America, who's a very dedicated chess person, been in the chess world for a long time, been highly recommended to me by other people who've done such things, and is a very, very nice person and works extremely hard to make chess a more popular thing. So the plan was I was going to fly over on Thursday. Obviously, I had to get 2 flights, a long journey, probably about 10 hours in total, but for when I leave my house, 14 hours pretty much. I was going to do 5-6 hours of talks on the Saturday, had all the material prepared, and on the Sunday I was going to do Simmel, I was going to do a meet and greet, take questions. Really going to be an enjoyable event where I was going to hopefully meet some people who like what I do, share some knowledge, and have a good time. So obviously I was excited about this, and I was going to get a bit of money for it, obviously, being a paid professional. I looked into what I needed to do to go to America, and I spoke to a couple of people who have been to America and done similar things. I contacted other people, and I even read a bit of information on the websites. And what I was told by all these people was that I needed to get an ESTA. I think it's an ESTA. It's called a visa waiver form. Because I'm only working for pretty much 2 days and I'm doing it at a conference, I thought this would be good enough. And that's what everyone said. Yeah, that would be fine. Well, they said 2 choices. That would be fine. The other thing you can do if you go to America, just lie that you're going there on holiday. One thing I don't want to do is really lie, especially to customs officials or police, because that could get me in some serious poo-poo. And I don't want to be in serious poo-poo. So I filled out this visa waiver, which was, I thought, for short-time work. That's what I read. Even on the visa waiver, that's what I was told. I was told it'd be totally fine. I got up at 5 a.m. in the morning, and I got to the airport, got over to Detroit airport, and arrived at customs there. Obviously I got questioned, by the way, at Heathrow as well, and they asked me, what are you doing over there? I explained to them totally honestly. They said, yeah, that's fine. Have you got a visa waiver? Yes, I have. Absolutely fine. Got over to Detroit, got questioned there, as everyone does. Totally understandable why they do this. I explained without lying exactly why I was there, doing a chess conference. I'm doing a speech at a chess conference, and I'm only there for 2 days, flying back on Monday. I have a visa waiver. Here's my visa waiver, which I've been told is fine. They said, come through to this room, please. And then I got questioned for the next hour and a half to 2 hours. And a lot of serious questioning. I mean, I know they're doing what their job partakes. And, actually, I'm not going to lie. The person questioning me was pretty good to me, was good to me, because he's just doing his job. And he seemed like a very nice guy. More on that a bit later. But I was totally honest. And but they asked lots of questions, like where are my parents born, stuff like this. And, I can say, you can Google me. What are you doing here? When are you going back? Do you plan to go back on the arranged date? They went through my phone, and they rung up. Bob, and they spoke to him. Bob was totally honest, legitimised the story I told them. I didn't tell any lies. And then the guy said, well, I've just got to check my superior to see if everything's okay. And I thought, fine. Then he comes back to me and says, my superior says you've got the wrong visa and you can't enter the country. To my absolute shock. And, it's terrible for me because I miss out on 4 days' work. Treatment not very good, being questioned like this. But worse still, I feel terrible for Bob, who's put so much work into arranging this, so I must apologise to him. And for everyone else who's paid money, about 40, 50 people have paid money to fly to Iowa to be at this chess conference. All I want to do, I'm just doing an honest bit of work and flying back. And, I have paid taxes this back in England. So, it's a crazy rule. And I know many people have done this before without the trouble I've got. So, then I say, what do I have to do? Well, they say, you've got to wait here in this room. You can't go anywhere else. You can't use your phone. They lent it off on that rule a bit later on. And you've got to wait until we get you the next flight back. So I waited there for, luckily, because I was quite nice to the guy, I had to only wait there 4 hours. Otherwise, I could be in that room for 24 hours. And then I got a flight back and, I got 2 armed guards escorting me onto the flight. Can you believe that? So I'm going back on a commercial flight in 4 hours' time. 2 armed guards extort me, put me on the flight. I feel like Pablo, Pablo, the drug smuggler. Hey, man. The person next to me when I go to sit down because I'm being escorted on by two armed guards and my ginger beard. At least I didn't go Allah Akbar to him straight away because that would have caused a lot of problems. Looked at me like I was some blooming kind of national drugs dealer or terrorist. So that was quite embarrassing. And it was really, really not a pleasant time. And, I didn't sleep for about 30 hours, the whole thing. And the whole experience was terrible. But, in hindsight, what should I have done? I'll show you the paperwork that I got. Maybe, maybe it's a little bit of me to blame. Maybe I needed to research more of exactly what visa I need to get. So I've got to take a little bit of blame. But going on everything I was told and, everything I thought I did, reading what I did. I even checked with people with Luke Van Whaley. I was very aware. And I asked people over in America, what do I need to do? They said, the ESTA's fine. Just do that. Otherwise, I'd have to go into the embassy and get a visa, arrange an interview, get a visa, do it that way. But obviously a little bit of my mistake, but just very heavily handed as well. And, a lesson to be learnt. But obviously just sorry to anyone who's watching this, I let down. So let me just show you, before I go on, some of the visa things that I got. So first of all, the thing you see on the left here, the P1 is what the visa I needed to apply for. This is apparently, so if you're ever going to America for a chess tournament, and even if you can win any prize money, this is what I was told. So even if you're an amateur player and you can win £100, if you can win £100, even if you're partaking, he said, the customs guy in a tournament and you have to pay an entry, you have to fill out this thing, even if you don't win a prize. So if you go to America, it's crazy. And this is an international recognized athlete. I didn't even know chess was a sport, but I needed to apply for this and fill this out and have an interview to do that at the embassy. You can see on the right-hand side, these are some of the questions I went through. The ESTA's what I got. I've never had any criminal records, so it's nothing to do with that. And I've got no other problems. So it was really just, this is part of the questioning I went through, which obviously they type out afterwards. My one bit of rebellion was taking this picture. I thought, right, I've got 4 hours. My one little thing I can try and do is take an illegal picture. So hopefully they'll let me back in. But to be fair, by this stage, they'd slacked off and said, look, you can use your phone. You're on the flight back, but you're not going to cause any trouble. So all in all, a rather depressing and dramatic thing. And I'm sorry for talking about this so much, but I thought some of you over there might want to know precisely what happened to me in the land of the free, unless you're working ginger or anything else. I mean, there's some other stories I could tell you there, but I am doing a chess video, so I've got to stop doing verbal diarrheaing here. Okay, well, let's go on to the chess game. So my opponent is Colin McNab, who is here is Colin. Not a very good picture, sorry about that, but he's a grandmaster from Scotland. I think he's been Commonwealth champion. He's a very experienced chess grandmaster. He's been British problem-solving champion as well. He's a very good player. And the funny thing is, I first played him in Dundee in 1993, in the first ever British Championships I partaked in. A long time ago, showing my age there, and I was only about 12 at the time, and I nearly beat him there on board one in a very interesting game when I was 12. But this game was very exciting, so let's rock and roll onto the chess. And I'm not using a computer assessment today. Give me your feedback on whether you like that or not. I'm just going to tell you my thoughts during the game. So I'm black. My opponent Colin either plays c4 or knight to f3. He normally plays c4. Now, the first thing I was thinking here is, well, what style opponent is my opponent? How am I going to get a game position which benefits me and works against his style? Now, Colin is a super rock solid positional player who's extremely experienced. If you get into any positional game, any ending, you're not going to win. So, for example, something like the symmetrical English is a very positional way of playing. This is not the right way to play against Colin. I need to pick an opening which gets him out of his comfort zone as soon as possible and presents him early questions. So this is the first thing I prepared, and this is something you all need to think about when you get better at chess, working against your opponent's style, as long as it suits your own style. Now, I've had many games with the Dutch against Colin with f5. Even in 1993, I played f5 against him. And I thought he'd be prepared against this. So I played a move I've never played against him, b6. And this turned out to be an inspired choice to get a position I wanted to play. Now, remember, I'm black. Very hard to beat this guy. So I'm not saying I won this game, but it was very interesting. And why did I play this move? Well, this is called the English defense, and it leads to very dynamic counter-attacking positions where, white can, if he plays standard moves, can find himself, funnily enough, in a very difficult situation. Now, also, I did a bit of preparation, and it seemed, according to what I looked at and when I looked at Colin's games, that he only played one setup against this, and he walked straight into my preparation. I think this is a mistake on his playing style. Now, and when you start off in chess, up to IM strength, you can play the same thing all the time. But when you really get good at chess, you need to be a bit more flexible. You need to smell the rat. So I think Colin should have not played his normal setup here. But he did. He went knight to c3, bishop b7, and now he went e4. And this makes a lot of sense because it blocks out my bishop, making it a less... should we say, strong? Well, it makes it less powerful. It gives it less range. So he's trying to block my bishop out. And I didn't play that move. That would be ridiculous. But one of the main ideas here is to play e6. This opening, the so-called English defense, was made very popular by a number of English grandmasters, basically in the 70s. Raymond Keane, very notably, who was a good player. Tony Miles, Britain's first ever grandmaster. I mean, great player, had great results to this. Spielman, another practitioner of this opening. And people like Julian Hodgson. So very imaginative, exciting, good players who thought of, in the old days when you didn't have computers, where you had to come up with imaginative ideas yourself. This is when this opening was developed. So it's a very imaginative opening for an imaginative players. And the point is, it's hypermodern. What does that mean? Hypermodern is fighting against the classicists, the classical players who say controlling the centre is the most important thing in chess. Korchnoi, for example, was a classical player. Hypermodern is more like the King's Indian defence, like Garry Kasparov used to play. You strike against the centre from the sides. So you let your opponent take over the centre and you take aim at it. And now my opponent played g3, a move which, again, he's played many times before. So one of your main breaks in the English defence, and you can hardly do without this move, is f5. This is your main break. If you don't do a pawn break, you're going to be too cramped. You need to fight against the centre. And this is the typical hypermodern move. You're fighting against the centre. You're striking against the centre. My opponent tries to reassure the centre, reinforce it, should I say. Bishop g2. And now I attack the centre, knight to f6. My opponent bolts it up, d3. And now I take on e4. And because my pawn is pinned, Colin plays knight to e2. There's no rush for him to take this back. And now I play knight to c6. And again, I'm following my preparation. This is a very good move. Holding on to my pawn, it leads to a very loose pawn structure for me. It's very suspicious to play this. If I try to hold on to it with bishop b4, my opponent just castles. He's going to win this pawn back. Knight to c6 is an idea I've played regularly in a Dutch defence, and this now resembles a Dutch opening. One of the things I actually wrote in my first book, Play the Classical Dutch, which came out in about 2000, 2002 maybe. And I suggested this kind of setup in the Dutch against the English there. And I was one of the first people to suggest that as an idea against the English. But I've got to it through a different move order here. So what's your idea? Well, my opponent takes back on e4, and now I develop my last minor piece to the best square, bishop c5. Both sides castle, very logical, castles, castles, and now we should take stock of the opening and who has really, what's going on? Because the opening stage, I'd say now, is opening. Opening? Over. The opening is over. Basically, this is a very interesting position. Piece-wise, I'm doing very well, I feel. My pieces have taken very good squares. Let's just have a look at the pieces one by one. My bishop, very dangerously placed. One threat immediately is knight to g4, really going for pressure against f2. That could just be winning if I'm able to play knight g4. So the bishop is very good. My knight on c6 has great potential to come to e5. My bishop on b7 also has great potential because it pressurizes this square. My knight on f6, we've seen, can jump into g4. My rook on f8 is open, so it strikes against f2. My queen may not look great, but in typical Dutch defence style, it has potential to swing over to the king side. So my pieces are fantastic. My rook on a8 is the only piece which is bad. That's the good news. The bad news is my pawn structure is not so good. I'm very cramped, and my opponent has a nice Maroczy kind of bind. These pawns on c4 and e4 is what we call a Maroczy bind, grip on the centre of the board. And positionally speaking, if my opponent is ever able to play the following moves, let's say f4 and e5, let's imagine somehow he can get a pawn to f4, a pawn to e5, positionally speaking, I am lost. Because if I can't get active counterplay of my pieces, let's say he puts a pawn on h3 as well, stopping tricks. Imagine those pawns there. He completely suffocates my pieces. My pieces will start to be pushed back. My knight will have to come back. My pieces are going to start to go backwards and backwards. And he has this pawn storm coming at me over on that side of the board, over on the king side. So positionally speaking, if he can mobilize his pawns where he has a majority, and this is what you should always do in chess, look where you have a pawn majority. He has 4 pawns there. I only have 3. So you should look where you have a majority, try to mobilize where you have a majority. I'm going to be in trouble, but especially here, because my pieces are going to just lack oxygen. They're going to suffocate. So what we need to be thinking of here, I need to be playing extremely active. If I start playing passive moves here, my opponent is going to be able to rectify his position, get his pawns rolling down, push me back. I'm going to be a lot worse, probably positionally lost. So I have to play, I have to have more of a sense of urgency here, because why do I need to do that? How have I worked this out? I'm understanding my opponent's ideas, but most importantly, a key thing in chess, you need to always be thinking about your opponent's pawn moves. Something that a lot of lower rated players forget to do. Your opponent's potential of his pawns. You've got to understand how the position might transform by pawn breaks. I don't really have any pawn breaks. d5 is never going to work. My opponent can come forwards. I can't really do that. I don't really want to play e5 because it gives him this d5 square. It's not the structure I'm going for. My knight can't come into e5. So you have to understand your opponent's pawn breaks. You have to sense the danger, which I've sensed here. If there is danger, you can't play slowly. So let's see how the game developed. h3. Of course, my opponent stops knight here. So what do? I need to play actively. Knight to e5. I've got to not be fearful. My knight jumps in, threatening to take this pawn. b3. And again, if my opponent can play king somewhere at f4, it's even worse now because I lose a tempo moving my knight. So I need to play actively. Do I have any jumps straight away? Not necessarily. Now here, I was thinking a very interesting move was knight to h5 here. This is what I was analysing. My knight's not on a very good square here. This is a bad square for the knight. But what am I actually trying to do here? Well, I'm trying to work tactically. I'm trying to open up my rook so my opponent can't move his king, because if he moves his king, he loses f2. So again, I'm working against my opponent's plan. My opponent in this position wants to move his king and go f4. So if I go knight to h5, he can't move his king, he can't go f4, and I'm also threatening little ideas like knight to f3 check. So this was a very intriguing possibility here. Maybe at some point I have some tactics with knight takes g3. You know, even sacrificing a piece of the queen coming in at some point is not out of the dilemmas of, well, should we say, possibilities. So queen to knight to h5 was interesting, but I wanted to play queen e8 because my one plan is to bring the queen over. Now my opponent, what does he do here? If he moves his king somewhere like h2, I now have the tactical move knight g4 check. Remember, I have to play with my pieces, and the whole point of this is if pawn takes here, winning a piece, well, my opponent's now probably completely lost because I have knight check, king g1, and now we see the point of this queen move, queen h5. Do please remember this queen move if you play the Dutch defense. This queen coming over to h5 it is such a powerful idea. It's one of my top maneuvers in chess. It's something you can't do in the Leningrad system or the King's Indian because you have a pawn in g6, but you can in the classical Dutch, and here it wins the game. Queen h2 is unstoppable. So this is something my opponent has to be very wary of. My opponent now panicked. I think he's okay here, but I would take black here. He played bishop to f4. So I thought, okay, well, I'll continue with queen to h5. And now I have ideas of knight to f3 check. So I'm playing with my pieces. And my opponent now played bishop takes e5. And I play queen takes e5. Now the transformation, swapping his bishop for my knight, who is that favoured? Whenever an exchange of pieces is made, you've got to think, who does that favour? If it favours you, encourage it, do it. If it favours your opponent, try to avoid doing it. Logical. Well, here, I think it clearly favours me because my dart square bishop is a fantastic piece. Again, I've got to stop him playing f2. This bishop has a lot of potential. I've also got little ideas of, you know, pressurising here and here. My queen is very well positioned to control the dart squares. This seems to me to be already an excellent position. I'm pressurising e4. He has to spend a tempo to defend that square. As long as I keep my dart square bishop on this fantastic square, I must be better. My opponent played queen d3, defending this pawn. A little question for you guys now. What would you play as black? And I would suggest now you pause the video when I say pause to really think about what is the right, I'm going to say this wrong, I don't give a damn, strategic. Dyslexia, yes, if you take the piss out of the way I pronounce things, who cares? You know, well done you on your pronunciation, bloody police. You know what I mean. If you don't, well, bugger off. So what should you do here? What is a good strategic plan, a good positional plan to put into fruitation? So pause now. Well, I think, again, what we need to do here is try to keep our pieces on these fantastic dark squares. From earlier on, I've given you a massive clue what white's trying to do. White is always trying to go f4. So we should always try to stop f4. How do we try to stop f4? By playing g5. If you found this move, congratulations. This is a very good move. It tries to control this square a little bit more, but also this pawn can come up to g4, and again, then if f4 happens, we can take on passant, and we stop our opponent ever pushing our queen away. So we're ensuring we have another outpost. We have 2 outposts for our pieces in the center, and it controls the dark squares. It gives us attacking pressure later on. It's just a good move. So well done if you found that. Now my opponent played rook to d1. And again, what should we do here? So we want to increase the pressure. We want to improve our pieces or start an attack immediately. Now the way I think about chess is a lot of it's on timing. If you're under pressure, if your opponent's played a move which actually has a threat, then you need to be more urgent generally. Now let's have a look at my opponent's last move, rook d1. Does that really do anything? No, it doesn't. It doesn't actually create a threat, meaning that I have more time. If my opponent had created a threat last move, I'd have more urgency. But I don't. I don't think I need to. So when my opponent plays a slow move, the way I think is I will try to improve all of my pieces, and then I'll try to do something aggressive. So as I've said before, my rook on a8 is the only piece not playing. So this is what I was thinking here. I need to get this rook to a better square. Now, g4 is a very playable move, but the threat is stronger than the execution. My opponent has done a nothing move, so I may as well wait with this move. Where should my rooks be placed? There's a half-open file. Chess, simple is good. We don't need to do exact, crazy moves in chess. Simple is good. Rook to f7. I'm just trying to bring my other rook into the game, increasing the pressure. My opponent played knight d4, and now, because he's trying to go knight to f3, which should be very embarrassing, I don't want to swap queens off, he's played a move compared to rook d1. Rook d1 was a nothing move. This move is an urgent move. Look at your opponent's last move. Where is that piece pointing? He wants to go knight to f3, forcing my queen away, forcing an exchange of queens. So now I don't have time to play a slower move. I have to play with more urgency here. So now I play g4. Very logical game. Chess is a logical game. My opponent can't really take that because then I will have the combination of knight takes and queen h5. Opening up towards his king. He has to try to keep it closed. h4. And now that I've stopped his threat, back to slow play. Rook to f8. Queen to e3 played. What's my opponent trying to do? Well, he's trying to maybe come to g5, when if I exchange off, he'll take and he'll attack my knight. So now knight to h5. And my knight wasn't really doing anything on f6 anymore because e4 is well defended. By moving the knight here, I open up my rooks. And in some possibilities, I pressurize g3, sacrifice, maybe even coming into f4. And all of the time, I'm thinking, what can my opponent play? Because if I can stop my opponent's ideas, if he has no breaks, I can slowly improve my position. I don't need to play with urgency here. I can take my time. My opponent played knight to a4. Do I want to swap off this very strong piece? Of course not. Bishop to e7. And now my opponent blundered. And this is the thing. Often in chess, you don't need to, winning a game is not all about forcing the way through. It's often about controlling your opponent's ideas, controlling squares. I'm controlling this square. I'm controlling the file. I have lots of control of dark squares. My opponent is running out of active moves. And even against grandmasters, if you do this strategy, if you have control, they are more likely to blunder. And now my opponent played knight b2, which is simply a blunder. The pressure has got to him. So what would you play now? Why is this a blunder? And again, pause now if you need to. Well, the knight is on the same file as the queen, so I simply play c5 and I'm winning a piece. It's not actually that simple still, but a piece is a piece. My opponent plays knight b5. I take on b2, and he takes on d7. Maybe this is even a sacrifice. Maybe Colin felt so desperate in his position, he felt the need to sacrifice. Now here I played bishop to c6, and my idea here is, well, he can win material now by going rook takes e7. For example, rook takes e7, queen g5 check. But now we simply transfer into a winning position for me. I'll go rook g7, queen takes here. And again, when you're material up, you want to exchange pieces. So I would have taken here. And now, after a move, I think I was going to go queen d4 here, just controlling everything. There might be better moves. His queen, for example, cannot move. I'm the exchange up. Maybe just queen d4 is fine, just controlling everything. My opponent is completely lost in some position like this. This might not be the best move, but it's good enough. His queen can't get out. I control everything. So I needed to calculate these lines, but Colin didn't do that. He played a better move. He's got 2 pawns to the piece, but I can now get rid of this dangerous knight. And here, what would you do here again? Well, you know, pause if you need to now. Well, there may be a number of ways to win this, but if you've got a better position, simplifying is good. What I mean by that, if you're material up, try to go for the simplest option available. Queen to d4, I'm a piece up. Let's just try to exchange the queens off, because then there's less chance I'm going to get tricked. If the queens come off, this is a very easily won position for me. This pawn will decide. I've got ideas of bishop c5, d3, taking here. It's very easily won here. His 2 pawns are irrelevant, because this one is one pass. You know, they're not doing anything. Is it 2 pawns? Even if it's 3 pawns, it doesn't. No, it's 2 pawns. Very easily winning. So he can't do this. Now, Colin here played queen e2, and actually here, this was the only mistake of the game I made. I had some brain freeze here, and I think this shows my rustiness. Now, the question I'm going to ask you, obviously, knight takes g3 is the move I want to play. Now, try to calculate this yourselves. Is this the correct move to play or not? And of course, this will require you doing some calculations here. So pause now, decide whether this is the move to play or not. Okay, pause now. Well, of course, knight takes g3 is, and I saw this, but I didn't play it, and this is a really slack of me. The only mistake I played, otherwise the rest of the game was very good. I had counted on queen takes g4 check. Maybe I was being a bit overly safe. You can't be overly safe. Rook g7, attacking the queen, and again, my opponent only has one move here. Queen takes e6. But now I can simply play king to h8, and I have no idea why I didn't play this, because it's very clear to see now that this is winning. I mean, rook takes e7. I just play knight takes f1, and I'm taking on f2 with check, you know, and this is clearly winning. I'm taking here as well, and there's nothing my opponent can do. So this maybe showed I'm a little bit rusty. I hadn't played for a while, not playing this. I mean, maybe I was being a little bit slack. When you've got a winning position, don't try to simplify too much. You've still got to calculate as much as you would any other point. I mean, here I played queen g7 with the idea of just going bishop f6, bishop d4, which is, of course, still winning. If I get my bishop to d4, my worst placed piece comes to a very good square. I control the d-file. I'm winning the game. But this is not, I could have won it straight away. But anyway, it's still good enough. Now the game continued, queen c4, and now I just went queen e5, realizing my mistake, queen e2. And the funny thing is now that my opponent's gone back, now I played knight takes g3. And this was a much harder tactic to see, but I'd woken up and I'd realized this leads to a forced win. Taking here, I can just go rook g7. He can't even take on e6, so he must take this piece. And now it's a forced continuation. Rook takes f1, queen takes f3 check. My opponent must, put the queens in the way. Queen takes h4, and even though I don't have such a material advantage here, White is in a completely helpless situation because my bishop is going to come into the game via one of these 3 squares, and when it lands on one of these 3 squares, the game is going to be completely over. My opponent Can't even give up the rook. That's going to be completely lost. And I calculate here is no defense. For example, e5. Maybe my opponent was banking on now c4 when he can go rook takes e7. Some hope. I don't need to play that. I need to get my bishop on this diagonal. So bishop g5. Trying to come into here. That's all I need to do. I've got 3 pieces attacking his king there. Normally enough to win. And after queen e2, stopping my bishop coming in, he allows my queen in. And now after king to h1, my bishop finally lands here. Queen to this square, checkmate is a threat. So is queen h4. So is rook f2. And in this position, there is nothing my opponent can do to stop checkmate. And he only had a couple of seconds on the clock as well. So he resigned here. So after this game, I'm on 2.5 out of 3. I've played 3 Grandmasters. I've had 2 blacks. Things are looking very good for me. 2.5 out of 3 against 3 very strong players. So I'm feeling very good. I haven't played chess for a while. And I'm in a positive mood. And that game was quite enlightening for me. You know, made me feel good after not playing for a while. I generally played I didn't really particularly do anything special. I picked a very good opening. I knew what I should be doing. So when you play an opening, you need to really know what you should be trying to do. And I knew that in this structure, which we got from the opening, that I need to play with my pieces. I need to try and I need to be willing to throw them in, maybe even sacrifice them. If I don't play with my pieces here, my opponent will play with his pawns. So it's really a battle of pieces against pawns, this whole game. And then I realized when we got to this position where I'm a little bit better, the right positional plan to use Gary the G-pawn to stop all my opponent's play and to create some threats. My opponent crumbled. I didn't finish it in the right way, but I did enough, and I was always better or winning this game. So, yeah, it's a good way to play. And very interesting opening, that English defence. Something I might well do a DVD on at some stage of GingerGM. I had a lot of experience in it. It's a very exciting way to play against d4 and c4 and knight to f3. And it's a very good way to unbalance the position and to play for a win. Okay, well, thank you very much for viewing that video. I'll try to do as many videos as I can. Also been very busy recently. Can't always do one a day, but I will try to keep pumping them out. I've got my like 10-12 hour stream coming up soon, and please keep tuned for when that is. But thank you very much for viewing this. Leave your comments below about anything.